Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's press conference. The Chief Executive will first speak before answering questions. Because of the epidemic, please keep social distance. If there are no questions, we'll first hear from the Chief Executive. Good afternoon, friends from the media and members of the public. This morning, the 13th National People's Congress's Standing Committee voted on the amended Annex 1 and Annex 2 of the Basic Law to improve the electoral system of Hong Kong SAR. This is in line with our constitutional order, the actual situation of Hong Kong, and it also implements the concept of Patriots administering Hong Kong. I and the governing team of the Hong Kong SAR strongly support the amended Annexes 1 and 2. On the 30th of June, the NPC endorsed the national security law. This is in line with the attempt to improve the constitutional structure of Hong Kong. This is a major exercise. This will keep Hong Kong on the right track to implement the one country, two system, and to keep us along the right path. The Annexes 1 and 2, amended by the NPCSC, have been published. We have also produced this booklet. We will start our publicity campaign to explain to the public. We will organize seminars and talks to explain the content of the amended Annexes 1 and 2. I'd like to express my gratitude to the central authorities for their support in the amendment exercise of Annexes 1 and 2. I thank them for incorporating my suggestions in the process. Central authorities have met with over about 1,000 people to listen to their views at the beginning of the month. The Hong Kong SARG has also set up a dedicated website. We will keep updating the website to disseminate information in important work in this regard by explaining to the public. I will give you more information of our work to improve our electoral system. We will dovetail our work with the decision. First of all, we will explain to the public. This is very important because our exercise to improve the Hong Kong electoral system, it is conducive to whether we will be able to focus on economic development, improving people's livelihood, and to ensure long-term stability and prosperity. With the legislation of the national security law, Hong Kong society as a whole has seen stability and peace again. But we do need political security and safety in order to forge an overall safe and secure environment, to equip ourselves to brace the challenges posed by economic downturn. This will also enable us to respond better to livelihood aspirations. We'll continue with our work with the explanation. After we have introduced the bill to the LegCo, we will need to work harder to explain not just to the public but to the LegCo as well. The second stage of our work is local legislation. Different from the legislation of national security law, which is a national which is a national law and promulgated in Annex 3. On the 30th of June in 2019, I have signed a gazette to legislate national security law. There was no need to take up any local legislation work. in that regard. However, when it comes to our electoral legislation, we've always done it by way of local legislation. With the amended Annexes 1 and 2, we have to embark on local legislation, local legislative amendment. There is no time to lose. We will work out a timetable to table and introduce the bill to the LegCo. There will be three elections in the coming year. The election committee election, LegCo election, as well as the election of the chief executive. When everything is ready, we will lose no time to make preparations for these three elections. As you can see from the amended Annexes 1 and 2, there are details specified in the amendment. In general, in our local legislative exercise, we will have to turn the content of the amended Annexes 1 and 2 into local legislation. You may notice that in these two annexes, there are provisions stating that, the details are to be specified in local legislation. You will see in the future that we will faithfully implement the content of Annexes 1 and 2. We will also deal with matters that are to be handled by local legislation. There are a number of these issues. First, how to delineate statutory associations, relevant associations, and eligible associations and institutions. All these specified associations and institutions will become members of the election committee in Annex 1. They are official members, nominated members, and elected members. The second area we have to work on is the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee. You're all very concerned about the composition of this committee. Details are not specified in the annex. That is, it will have to be done by way of local legislation. We will specify the composition and operation of the review committee.
The third area is about the delineation of geographical constituencies in the LegCo elections. With the amendments to Annex 2, LegCo members returned by geographical constituencies would go from 35 seats to 20 seats across 10 constituencies with 2 seats at each constituency. And as such, delineation is needed in this regard. As for the actual electoral arrangements, such as nominations, election, or voting, we will take this opportunity to deal with issues encountered in the previous polling day. We will provide priority queues for the elderly or pregnant women, as well as electronic voting. These would be stipulated by way of local legislation. And in terms of timeline, time is indeed very tight. We have explained the relevant timeline in the booklet. Our goal is to introduce the bill to the Legislative Council by mid-April. So we are only about 2 weeks from the middle of April. And like the Permanent Secretary said at LegCo, we have to amend some 20 pieces of main and subsidiary legislation, so the workload is certainly very heavy. We will do our best so that we can introduce the bill 2 weeks from now. It will be an omnibus bill. Even if we are to amend 5 pieces of main legislation, the other items of subsidiary legislation would be included in one omnibus bill for the sake of convenience. Hopefully, the scrutiny of the bill and the third reading could be completed by the end of May, and after that we would begin the next stage of work. Assuming that the bill is passed by May, we will proceed to voter registration in June. Since the electoral base would have changed as a result of the amendments, voter registration must start anew, including the election committee subsectors and the electoral election. Our plan is to first deal with the elections for the election committee subsectors in September. By December, we will have the general election for the 7th electoral, and in March next year, we will have the chief executive election. Perhaps the question is what the arrangements for the current term Legislative Council will be. It will remain in operation till the 7th general election of LegCo. Normally, there will be a termination arrangement to allow members to be nominated and run for the next term. In other words, the current term of LegCo will continue till mid-December. I met the LegCo president, Mr. Andrew Leung, earlier today, and we talked about the need for continuation of LegCo, and there is a clear constitutional basis due to the epidemic. The 7th general election of LegCo was postponed for a year, and the MPCSC made a decision to deal with the vacuum at LegCo, and the arrangement was to allow the current term LegCo to continue for no more than 1 year. So a further continuation of 1 month is sound from a constitutional basis, but amendments to local legislation would be needed. Under the emergency regulations, we have stipulated that the current the election this year will take place on the 5th of September. And I informed Mr. Andrew Leung of the situation, and I hope that he would consider allowing the current term LegCo to continue for a few more months. Apart from the bills being considered at LegCo and the complicated electoral legislation that is underway, we have 16 more items of legislation, including the bills covering areas of concern. For instance, the introduction of non-locally trained doctors, arrangements or legislation on protecting personal data, privacy, etc. Meanwhile, at the Finance Committee, more than $100 billion worth of funds are pending approval by LegCo. Earlier today, the LegCo president indicated to the media that he is happy to complement our work and continue the work of LegCo till December. And this summer, there will not be a long recess as usual. I think this is a manifestation of the relationship or checks and balances between the legislature and executive. So I'd like to express my gratitude to Mr. Leung and all the Legislative Council members. Going forward, we will fully support the work of LegCo in scrutinizing this omnibus bill on electoral legislation. I will pause here. I believe there will be a number of questions. Myself, Mr. Chang, and Roy will try to answer them as much as we can. Please identify your organization before you speak. We have a large number of journalists, so please limit yourself to no more than 2 questions. The gentleman on the front row, please. I'm from Hong Kong, and my name is Pang. One of the key areas of the reform is the new Candidate Eligibility Review Committee. You said details would be announced when we reach the stage of local legislation. What would be the composition of the review? How many members will there be? Will there be any limitations such as term you are the chairman of the Committee for Safeguarding National Security. The committee, based on the reviews conducted by the National Security Department of the Police, would provide an opinion, and the decision of the committee is not subject to any JR. So how can you prevent any errors and maintain the spirit of rule of law? If a judicial review is not possible, how can you safeguard the right of candidates to run in an election? Both your questions were related to the Eligibility Review Committee. First of all, in Annexes 1 and 2 of the Basic Law, the NPCSC provided for a Candidate Eligibility Review Committee to ensure that individuals who have the chance to run an election and enter our political system are patriots. This is crucial to the improvement exercise. So in a way, it plays a role of gatekeeper. And there is a basis to that as well. In the current electoral legislation in Hong Kong, we have the role of returning officers who fulfill this task. In each election, candidates must uphold the basic law, plead allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR, and they must prove to the satisfaction of returning officers that they are sincere. And in recent years, there were cases in which candidates were disqualified, and upon election petitions, it was made clear that such requirements were legal requirements on candidates. And this is why we need the Eligibility Review Committee. This is nothing new. The setting up of this review committee has replaced the function of returning officers. There were criticisms that such an important task was vested in the returning officers who were civil servants, and there were cases of doxing or intimidation. And it would not be reasonable to ask the returning officers to shoulder such a heavy burden, and that is why the review committee is set up. And there were calls that the review committee must be neutral and unbiased. The Eligibility Review Committee will not consist of many members, and members will be the principal officials of the Hong Kong SAR government. So we are going from a single returning officer to multiple principal officers of the SAR government. All of them are these principal officers are nominated by the CE and appointed by the central government, and they will make up the review committee.
Relation to national security, the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee will have to review the eligibility of candidates on a number of things, say, for example, their eligibility, as well as whether they have any criminal conviction. So they have to take into account a number of factors. Candidates running for the legislative election, the running for the chief executive election, will have to be vetted. Whenever there are question marks over certain candidates, then the matter will be referred to the Committee for Safeguarding National Security for vetting. I am the head of the committee. But who is tasked to take up this work of vetting eligibility? Under Article 17 of the National Security Law, it states that the National Security Department of the police force is to take up national security vetting. So the National Security Department of the police force will be tasked to take up this job. Their finding will be referred to the Committee for Safeguarding National Security of the Hong Kong SAR. And then the review committee will review and decide on the eligibility of the candidate. If a candidate is deemed to have failed the requirements, then an opinion will be issued to the review committee for the committee to decide whether to disqualify the candidacy. A disqualification in this situation will offer no recourse in legal proceedings. This is the case because of the National Security Law. The National Security Law states that all the materials and information vetted is not to be made public, and the decision of the Committee for National Security is not subject to any legal proceedings. That is why. Next question. The reporter with long hair. I'm from cable TV. First of all, I see that with the amendment, the National Security Department will first carry out an investigation. As you know, that they enforce the law. On top of that, they can vet candidates. Is it too much power? Why do they have to take up this work on top of their duties? And you said that the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee comprises members of principal officials. Isn't it the case of intervention by the executive? As we can see that in one of these sectors, they are members of CPPCC delegates and MPCSC delegates. How do you expect the pan-democrats to get their votes? Does it mean that they are not going to be able to run in an election? There are a number of questions. First, it's not the case that we have handed the task to the police department. Article 17 of the National Security clearly states that these are the duties and functions of the police department. One of them is to conduct investigations. This is a department set up under the National Security Law. They have the manpower and the resources to take up this work. It is not a task that is to be done by an ordinary department or any official. So this is done in accordance with the law. This is the good use of resources given to the police force. So they are basically looking at the same type of information and material. So that is why. Principal officials are members of the review committee. As I've explained, that currently the vetting of candidates, eligibility of candidacy is done by a returning officer. We have the Election Affairs Committee. But a lot of the duties are carried out by civil servants. We don't worry about their political affiliations. And there are people who are concerned about sanctions and doxing. I've heard some concerns that people will be afraid to be members of the review committee because of these reasons. But you don't have to worry when it comes to principal officials because they are trusted by the central authorities. The central authorities appointed these principal officials. So this is not an intervention by the executive. This is an appropriate arrangement. Subsector, the fifth sector. For someone to run in an election, whether it is a candidacy in the election committee, in the functional committee, or a geographical constituency, they have to get nomination vote from the election committee. That applies to all 5 sectors. And they only need 2 members to nominate them, or at most 4 members of the election committee to nominate them to run in a legislative election. We want to get a more balanced outcome. We want to make sure that the candidate gets support from all sectors, not just from, say, the commercial sector or from the labor sector. This is to reflect the broad representativeness. In the future, candidates for the chief executive will have to get nomination from each of the sector in the election committee, altogether 15 of them. I think sometimes you equate pandemocrats with people that are not patriotic. This is unfair to them. I do believe that there are people in the pandemocratic camp who are patriots. Our design wants to enable patriots administering Hong Kong. So regardless of the sector, say for example the 5th sector, that they are NPCCC delegates, NPC delegates, members of national associations. Well, as long as the candidate can prove that they are patriots, that they have not done anything that are unpatriotic, that they have not colluded with overseas government to undermine the national sovereignty, and they're doing something meaningful, I'm sure that they will be able to get nomination from the 5th sector. If you don't believe me, ask members of the NPCSC or CPPCC whether they will refuse to give nomination votes to someone who is from the pandemocratic camp. I don't believe they will.
Next question, the gentleman on the front row, please. I'm from CCTV. The NPC SE unanimous passed the amendments to Annexes 1 and 2 to the Basic Law to improve the electoral system of the Hong Kong SAR. And with the new empowerments of what improvements would be made to the election committee, and in terms of the new democratic system with Hong Kong characteristics, how would it be manifested? Let me put it this way. Any democracy would consider different factors. I do not see any democracy that would work everywhere. Any democracy needs time to mature, and in the case of Hong Kong, any democratic system must take into account the issue of constitutional order, and our constitutional system is based on one country, two systems. The HKSAR is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China, and as such, we need patriots to administer the system. And we also need to consider the actual circumstances. Some places are rich, some are very poor, but everything is based on the actual circumstances and its people. And in Hong Kong, we face a few years of chaos, and due to loopholes in our electoral system, it has been exploited. Some individuals entered our political system and wreaked havoc. When you look at the booklet, when you can look at the photos and the chronology of the chaos, and it illustrates the chaos we have faced in the legislature in recent years. So our top priority is to tackle the chaos and to restore order in the legislature. And the legislature and the executive must provide checks and balances on each other, and we must maintain an executive-led system. And in this regard, this morning the NPCSC unanimously agreed amendments to Annexes 1 and 2 to the Basic Law, having considered Hong Kong's constitutional order and how it could be maintained and how we can ensure that Patriots are administering Hong Kong and to provide a stable political environment for Hong Kong. I hope the public understands the considerations made by the Central People's Government. Last year, the national security law was drawn up. To this side is the national security law, and on the other, we have the improvement to the electoral system. So hand in hand, they can help stabilize Hong Kong, and that one country, two systems can continue to operate smoothly so that we can focus on tackling the various deep-seated interests or issues in Hong Kong. Next question, please. The lady in orange. I'm from Xinhua Agency. And in terms of the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee, it is responsible for reviewing and confirming the eligibility of candidates for the election committee, the office of the CE, and the Legislative Council. How do you ensure that the decisions made would be fair and impartial? And under the new system, how can you ensure that capable patriots could administer Hong Kong? Thank you for your questions. Both of them were related to the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee. The function of the committee is to review candidates who intend to run in an election, including the Election Committee, Office of the CE, and Legislative Council. For LegCo, regardless of the manner regardless to the manner in which a candidate is returned, they would be subject to the review committee. Under the current electoral system, we have a post that is a returning officer, and the officer's duty is to confirm whether a candidate is eligible, and some of the criteria are very objective, including the age, background of a candidate, and there's also assessment on whether a person would bear allegiance to the Hong Kong HKSAR and uphold the Basic Law. This is the current practice. The NPCSC passed the improvement exercise by introducing the new Eligibility Review Committee. Like I said, the NPCSC vested the work in us by way of local legislation, and like I have said, the review committee would be made up of a few principal government officials. They are part of Hong Kong's governing team. They are vastly experienced and they can properly understand the legal requirements, and these are officials appointed by the Central People's Government, so they are certainly reliable. As to how they go about the work to achieve fairness, And the NPCSC introduced a requirement that is reviewed by the Committee for Safeguarding National Security. If a person does not uphold national security, they would certainly not be considered as upholding the basic law. And there would be assessment on whether a person would jeopardize national security, and this case would be handed over to the Committee for Safeguarding National Security, in which I'm the chairman. And based on the Hong Kong National Security Law passed in June last year, the National Security Department of the Hong Kong Police Force is responsible for conducting reviews on national security matters, and after that, the Committee for Safeguarding National Security would decide whether the candidate is deemed eligible. If the requirements are not met, an opinion or decision would be issued to the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee, and at that point, the review committee can decide whether to allow a candidate to run. So this is a very robust system compared with the current practice, and we can ensure that Patriots would administer Hong Kong.
The other question is how to ensure that capable patriots will enter our political structure. This is a very good question. The NPC made a decision on the 11th of March. One of the objectives is to improve Hong Kong's electoral system and to enhance the governance of Hong Kong SAR. We need a rational legislative council, but that alone doesn't mean that the governance of Hong Kong will be enhanced. I myself and the governing team is responsible for the effectiveness and efficiency of governance. We need a good structure to help us. But why would I say that this structure will enhance our governance? Well, for quite some time, I have come across a lot of people with high caliber, but they are reluctant to become legal members and to enter the government because everything is too politicized and there is too much internal rift. With an improved electoral system, I do believe that there will be more people with high caliber that are willing to help the government and to become legislators. In the past few elections, we have not seen any able individuals willing to enter the government or become a member of the LegCo. The reporter at the back.
Good afternoon. Several English questions from RTHK English News. First question, is it appropriate to let National Security Police have a say on who can stand in elections and make decisions on local politics? And is the power given above their duties as law enforcement? With the new vetting body and the National Security Commission comprising of the CE and senior government officials, would there be a conflict of interest involved as the current CE, you yourself, can basically decide who can run in the next CE elections and possibly as your opponent, and who will be voting in the CE election as well? Second question, with a candidate qualification process filled with hurdles and screening and the directly elected seats in all bodies kind of significantly reduced, critics have been asking why not just do appointments instead of elections? How will you answer to that? Thank you.
The first question, let me repeat it again and read out what is in the National Security Law. In a national security law that was enacted on 30th June last year and implemented in Hong Kong, it has Article 17, which specifies the duties and functions of the Department for Safeguarding National Security of the Hong Kong Police Force. And it does include very categorically to conduct national security review. So it is the function of the Hong Kong Police Force. They are only conducting review. They are doing the fact-finding and then present the facts to the committee that I chair, that is the Committee for Safeguarding National Security of the Hong Kong SAR. The decision of whether a candidate, based on the findings, could fulfill or meet the statutory requirements of swearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR and upholding the basic law is not one for the Hong Kong Police Force. It is one for this committee. And by the way, the English translation of this committee is the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee, okay? So that is point number one. And it is only right because you need resources. You need to build up that expertise to how to find the facts. It is not something that you and I can do. So the police has been given this responsibility under the national security law. So it is only right that they will discharge this duty as required under the national security law. Now the second question is about conflict of interest. Well, first of all, this committee is comprised of not one single individual, but several principal officials. And although I said that if they are disqualifying candidates on the basis of national security, then they could not disclose why. That is the details, and the decision is not subject to judicial review. But it is all in the public domain for people to see that whether a particular person has been disqualified. So I don't think that the mere fact that the chief executive is the chairman of the National Security Committee will be able to single-handedly decide who is eligible, who is not eligible. The public has all to judge whether a decision has been made rightly or wrongly, because for somebody to compete or contest in a CE election, it could not be somebody who is totally unknown. I'm sure that the society will be able to judge whether how could this candidate be disqualified. There must be that sort of expression of opinion if that sort of thing happened just because of an incumbent chief executive trying to interfere with the decision of the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee. Now the third question is a very broad one about how one should look at this set of improvements to the electoral system of Hong Kong, or whether how one could justify this set of improvements to the people of Hong Kong. Now that brings me back to the question of democracy. So how one should judge democracy? What is the best system of democracy? I am one of those who will not subscribe to a view that there is only one single model of democracy in this world. There is no one size that fits all. If you want to look at which is an optimal democratic process or development in a place, then you have to look at several factors. One is, of course, the constitutional status of this place, whether it is a country, whether it is a federal state, whether it is a special administrative region, that is a district administration like Hong Kong. Secondly is the actual circumstances, the pace of development, and so on. So in our case, yes, since 1997, we have several rounds of elections. And I may as well say this very categorically, that the central government is very sincere to give Hong Kong people so-called more democracy, that is universal suffrage. So on 3 occasions since 1997, the National People's Congress Standing Committee has passed decisions or interpretations to allow us to move forward. But who has jeopardized those improvements? I'm sure you have an answer, okay? So as lately as the last one, which was conducted by me as a team leader, I was very convinced, and I'm very convinced now that that is a very good package that will enable Hong Kong people to choose the chief executive by one person, one vote. But that was vetoed by the so-called pro-democracy members in the Legislative Council. So we could not blame the central government, we could not blame the Hong Kong SAR government But what we have seen since around 2014, maybe Occupy Central, and then we have the Mong Kok riot, and then we have the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, and then all these riots. And then we have the 35 plus and all these things that get people very worried. What will happen if we do not plug the loopholes in the Hong Kong electoral system? So it is for that reason that this set of improvements has to be put in place in order to ensure that Hong Kong's electoral system is in line with one country, two systems. It will not return candidates who become politicians or who become part of the governing team that will endanger national security, that does not mind destroying Hong Kong. That has been a slogan adopted by the so-called the pro-democracy camp. They don't mind to destroy Hong Kong as long as they seize the majority in the Legislative Council and force the chief executive to resign, and then force the central government to step in, and then riots and bloodshed. These are all writings that have been expressed by somebody who wanted to destroy Hong Kong. It's not created out of the blue by myself. So it is with that sort of chaotic and dangerous situation that the central government has no option but first to enact the national security law, and then now to improve the electoral system. But the ultimate purpose of universal suffrage is still there. It has not been changed. Article 45 and Article 68 of the Basic Law that provides for universal suffrage as an ultimate goal for Hong Kong has not changed. Not a single word has changed. So what will happen is, yes, as we move ahead with the current set of improvements in place, then in accordance with Hong Kong's actual situation and in an orderly and gradual manner and meeting the requirements in Article 45, I am quite certain that we will still have universal suffrage in selecting the chief executive. But we just need to act in concert and make sure that we are not moving away from this very fundamental concept of one country, two systems. Thank you.
Let's take one more English question before we return to Chinese. 後排左手邊位男記者。
The gentleman at the back, please.
You won't be doing the vetting yourself, but how can you expect your principal officials to be doing their jobs without fear or favor when they are vetting their boss or their future boss? And how will you choose the convener of the election committee? The document says that it will be taken up by someone in an office of state leadership. Does it leave just two of your predecessors in your current job to take up that post? And again, is there a conflict of interest if you would have a role in picking the convener of that very important election committee? Secondly, you've said that you want the future elections to represent all sectors of society. Why then have you booted out all district councillors from the election committee, which is by definition the most representative because it was done by universal suffrage, whether it was in a federal or a unitary system, and replace them with committees of fire safety and district fight crime committees that very few people in Hong Kong have heard of. And you just now, you said that Beijing has given Hong Kong, had tried to give Hong Kong more democracy back in 2014. Is it still your intention to bring that proposal back? And is that the next step that you will take? Or is that off your table? Thank you.
Sorry, which organizations are you from?
SCMP.
Sorry.
Sorry, I can't hear you, sorry.
SCMP.
Thank you.
SCMP, okay. There are 4 questions, at least I try to answer them. By the way, I do have a bit of time, so you can continue to ask, I'll continue to answer your questions, because this is such an important subject. Now, as far as the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee, it will make up of principal officials, several principal officials. Your worry is about fear of favor and conflict of interest. But I'm telling you that, especially talking about the chief executive candidate will not be a nobody in Hong Kong. So whatever committee, whatever principal officials, it is not up to them to arbitrarily decide that a CE candidate does not fulfill the requirements of swearing allegiance to the Hong Kong SAR and upholding the basic law. So I have to say that that sort of worries are exaggerated. Okay. The second point is about the convener. Convener is not appointed by me. The convener has been specified in the Annex 1 as whoever in the 1,500 election committee who is assuming duties of a state leader or who is performing state leadership duties. So I take it to mean it will be the vice chairman of the CPPCC. But I could not tell you which one because it's not specified, it's not for me to say. But I want to assure you that this is a clause for use under very, very exceptional and rare situations. And this convener system will only kick in during elections. During normal periods of governance, this convener system or the chief convener has absolutely no role in the governance of the Hong Kong SAR. It certainly will not have any influence over the chief executive or the principal officials. So it is really under very exceptional circumstances during the course of an election that something that is totally unforeseeable has happened, that it needs a plan to tackle, then the central government may trigger this convener system. But prior to that, I would draw your attention to another paragraph in the annex or somebody in the decision, in the earlier decision made on the 11th of March, paragraph 8 or article 8 in the 11 March decision of MPC, it says that the chief executive of the Hong Kong SAR shall submit in a timely manner to the Central People's Government reports on the arrangements for the electoral system and the organization of elections in the Hong Kong SAR and other relevant important matters. So I would imagine, because if I were the then CE with this Article 8, if something very exceptional happens in an election, the first thing that will happen is the CE will submit a report to the CPG saying that something very unusual, very exceptional has happened during an election. So then the CPG will consider what action to take. And the fact that there is a chief convener within 1,500 members may be a ready way that something, some action could be taken. But I'm only explaining to you that there is a role of the chief executive in the process. But I'm not appointing anyone, so it has nothing to do with me, and it will not appear in the local legislation. While I said that the local legislation will need to reflect what is in Annex 1 and Annex 2, this is the thing, or the provision, that will not appear in Hong Kong SAR, the electoral laws. The third is about district councils. Actually, we got a very detailed answer in this booklet on why district councils are excluded. Now, district councils, by definition, under Article 97 of the Basic Law, they are not supposed to be organs of political power. They are advisory bodies to tender advice to the government on district matters. They don't even have an executive duty. They don't even exist as a legal entity to pay money to somebody and so on and so on. They are advisory bodies. But over the years, especially after the last election, we have seen this huge politicization of the district councils, that they become sort of also organs of political power, trying to influence the political system in Hong Kong, and also to use the platforms into doing anti-China, anti-government measures and so on and so on. So the exclusion of the district councils is to restore them back to their intended constitutional role, that it is, they are not organs of political power. They are only advisory bodies to give advice to the government on various district matters. But having said that, the Central People's Government realized that if we are to achieve this broad representation in the election committee, and to have a balanced participation by more sectors in the population, then we need to find other candidates or other subsectors which are able to reflect the district views and also to provide a grassroots perspective to governance. So in the 1,500 members, as you have pointed out, there are several subsectors which will fulfill this role very nicely. For example, in the 18 districts, each district will have an area committee, each district will have a district fight crime committee, and each district will have a district fire safety committee. And if you look back at the history, these committees exist well before, some of them exist well before the district council. For example, DFCC, the district fight crime, because in those days, safety was paramount. So the DFCC actually dated back to 1973. Okay? And then the area committee in 1972, well before we have district councils. So they are really very ready groups or subsectors that could fill this role of reflecting this grassroots or district views to the election committee and to the overall governance in Hong Kong. And on top of that, there are still other called the grassroots associations. There are also those called clansmen associations. So they bring together a very wide spectrum of ordinary people who are able to participate in this election committee. So I think that is an improvement over the existing system, where because of the loophole in the election system, you could have 80% of district council members coming from one single stance, which is not a balanced representation at all. Now, the final question is about universal suffrage. As I said, Article 45 and Article 68, that is the ultimate goal of achieving universal suffrage, respectively, for the selection of the chief executive and the formation of a legislative council, remain intact. Not a single word has been changed. So when the actual situation permits, which is written in the two articles, in a gradual and orderly manner, and in accordance with Article 45, that is, the CE has to be nominated by a broadly representative nominating committee. When those conditions are fulfilled, I do not see why we will not move ahead and gradually move towards the ultimate goal of universal suffrage. But it will not happen within my term. We don't have time to allow the system to evolve and establish and mature in order to attain that objective. Thank you.
下一條題問，右手邊前排白色衫嗰位女。
Next question, the lady in white. I'm from RTHK. The first question is in relation to composition of the election committee. I see that for a number of the subsectors, over half of the seats are handed over under to the nomination by national associations. Say, for example, the Academy of Science and a number of other mainland institutions. Well, does it have an impact on a high degree of autonomy? There are also some subsectors that have been removed. Do you think that these removed subsectors are not as important as DFCCs or the fire safety committees? The second question is in relation to the direct election of geographical constituency in the electoral. What about the delineation? What is your preliminary view? Will you take reference of the current geographical constituencies and then redelineate them into 5? In relation to the subsectors, there is a group of them that are returned upon a nomination. There is such a thing currently. It's from the religious subsector. We don't set the eligibility, say, for example, what constitutes a Catholic or a Protestant. So, return by nomination exists in our electoral system. Under the amendment, there are more members that are returned by nomination. There are 165 of them that are returned upon nomination. They are from different subsectors, but they are not nominated by the central authorities. That would be Hong Kong people nominating these candidates. There may be affiliations with mainland Chinese institutions, but they are the Hong Kong members of these institutions. I don't understand why you say that they are unfamiliar. Say, for example, in relation to the innovation and technology subsector, there are 15 members from this technology and innovation subsector. They will be nominated by Hong Kong academicians of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering. They know Hong Kong well, and they are elite. We have Zhi Jiming, Wang Laijing, Yam Wenhua, Leung Ziyan. They are all professors that know Hong Kong really well. They are the very people that I've mentioned before. They would like to see the chaos in Hong Kong to end. They very much would like to enter the establishment in Hong Kong. It's not the case that we have rooted higher education. We have combined it with the education subsector. We have only combined the two subsectors. In the LegCo, there is only one seat, the education sector, and the voters are from university or tertiary educational institutions. There are 10 sectors in the GC, and each of them will return 2 members, single seats. We will combine the 400 district council constituencies and redelineate them into 10 GCs in the LegCo. It will be done by way of local legislation. Let's see if my colleague has anything to add. In the November 2019 District Council election, the EAC has delineated Hong Kong into 452 constituencies. We will redelineate them into 10 geographical constituencies for the LegCo. That basically meets the basic requirements set down by the Electoral Affairs Commission. The reporter in white at the back. I'm from Now TV. First, I'd like to ask about the changes in the functional constituencies, FC. Now there is commercial third. What is it? And I also see that there is a combination into medical and health services, and also a change in innovation and technology subsector. Why? The second question is, currently for the LegCo, each voter will have 2 votes. After the change, there is a chance that someone will get 42 votes. Is it still a fair electoral system? There is not a lot of changes in the FC of the LegCo. The most important element of change is the election committee in terms of functions and election method. Well, there are reasons for all these changes. In relation to commercial third, is the Hong Kong Chinese Enterprises Association. Well, there has always been this subsector in Hong Kong. They are Chinese enterprises in Hong Kong. No one will deny their importance. Over half of the listed companies are mainland enterprises. They employ a large number of people. They actively participate in charitable events. We have the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and we have a number of other associations, the third being the Hong Kong Chinese Enterprises Association. Yes, in the second sector, we have combined medical and we have combined certain subsectors into medical and health services. Well, this is the same rationale as education and higher education. You're in the education sector, you're education sector. You're in the health services sector, then you are in the medical and health services sector. There are 30 seats. Technology and innovation is a new subsector. Information technology sector has been a headache for our electoral system, especially for the ICAC. It has created a lot of problems. It is not a profession, it's a trade. There is no requirement of statutory registration like lawyers or teachers and accountants. Who are the actual practitioners? Under the current system, we will refer to a list of members. And practically anyone can be a voter in this subsector. So we have revamped this subsector. We don't call it information technology subsector. It is now innovation and tech. It is now technology and innovation. There is no individual practitioners per se in this subsector, so it will be by way of corporate votes. There are 15 members nominated from Hong Kong academia. They are elites from this subsector. Every change is supported by reasons. If you're interested, you can ask us all the questions you want. This is not done arbitrarily. Everything is done to reflect the ultimate objective to improve our electoral system.
As for the number of votes per voter at the electoral council, before the reunification, not all electors had the same number of votes, and there is no universal principle on what makes for the fairest arrangement. Even globally, there are no hard requirements on the elections, and even so, they might not necessarily apply to Hong Kong. So under the improved arrangement, some voters can only have a vote in the geographical constituency if they do not belong to any groups. And on the other hand, for professionals, they might have multiple votes. And for some people, they could have more votes in the election committee. But I do not find this unfair. There are three parts to the system. There are members returned by the election committee as well as those returned by GCs and FCs. Next question. The lady on the front row. I'm from Mingpao. In terms of 2 votes for a person at the legislative election, so does a voter have a maximum of 3 votes? For the ordinary public, going from 2 votes to 1 vote, do you see this as an improvement or regression? Commercial or the second sector of EC is comprised of professionals. There's a transition to corporate votes. What is its justification? Does it allow for easier manipulation for the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee? The Committee for Safeguarding National Security will issue an opinion based on the review of the National Security Department of the police force. But the findings of the Committee for Safeguarding National Security would not be disclosed, but would the candidates themselves be explained be informed of the reasons why they are denied. As for whether this is an improvement or regression, we must look at the big picture. The overall electoral system is improved to achieve the goals I mentioned, and from this perspective, there is certainly an improvement and a substantial one at that, because all the loopholes have been plugged. Given the premises, since there used to be the supersede of the district council, some people might lose a vote, and some people might feel aggrieved. But the idea is to improve the overall electoral system. So we find this arrangement acceptable. As to what constitutes the ideal democracy, it depends on the place and the actual circumstances. Hong Kong has seen so much chaos already. Should we insist on the old system of 2 votes per person and allow the loopholes to continue, which in turn jeopardizes national security? We should set our eyes on the big picture instead of the fine print in the system. As for the individual votes and corporate votes, under the improved system, the election committee and functional constituencies of LegCo would exercise 2 separate systems. They should not be coupled anymore. They do not have to mirror each other. For the election committee, the Central People's Government made it very clear that the new election committee must satisfy multiple criteria. They must be broadly representative, and it must take into account the actual circumstances, and there must be balanced participation. So these criteria would be fulfilled by the new design. If in an election committee subsector, if the 30 members elected have no experience in the sector and they have no association with the sector, then the criteria